cloud, and everything is going quite well, I think. Yeah, perfectly. Hello, everybody on Facebook. Today, I was actually able to start the show on Facebook as the outro was playing on StreamYard, and then I was able to go back to StreamYard and close the show, and you really don't want to hear any of this stuff.
I do. I think it's very fascinating.
No, you don't.
No, I do,
but
actually.
But the idea of the outro is, first of all, you can't have like what's the point of an intro with a show without an outro? And then with that, there's the ability then to use that now as a way to cheat, which is to start the show in Zoom and then start the recording. Well, man, we've got a full house today of all our regulars. The only thing we don't have is Augie.
Who?
Should we just do our next community edition of our show? What's on your mind, Tom Morris?
Well, I've had all kinds of tech issues today. I started watching you on my iPhone and it froze at a certain point, and then I scrambled and tried LinkedIn and I couldn't get you to play on LinkedIn, and I finally found you on YouTube. So I've had a spotty experience of today's session, which was nonetheless excellent as always. I love the stuff about optimism and when it shades into delusion. When is optimism a good, and when is it an ill? So you're sparking all sorts of thoughts about that.
Well, we've got, just to let you know, we really do have a bit of a full house today. We've got William Charnock, previous guest on. And William, I don't know if you heard the reference to agape, to love, with the episode of Tim Sanders, which was an amazing episode. And Augie's here. And so I think you might want to repeat that question, Tom.
Oh, hey, Augie, I was telling, great show. I was telling Joseph I had all kinds of tech issues, and the iPhone broke down, and I had to go to this platform, and it broke down. I had to go to that. So I've got spots in my watching today, but nonetheless, really wonderful. I love what you said about optimism, which sparks a lot of thoughts. Like, is optimism an unalloyed good, even when grounded, realistic, founded, or is it like what the philosophers call a second order good, like authenticity? You know, you say to people, be yourself, be authentic. Well, you don't want to say that to a sadist, right? Or to a mass murderer. And so it's a second order good. It depends on some first order virtues being kind of in place. Then authenticity is a good thing. Well, optimism, there are two scopes for optimism. With respect to my individual efforts, I can be an optimist. With respect to external developments, I can be an optimist. So there's the inner optimism, there's the outer optimism, but in each case, it's supposed to be answerable to probabilities and evidence, and not totally separate from those kind of issues, right? Like William James, the great Harvard psychologist and philosopher, had this concept of precursive faith.
And that's what happens when optimism is replaced with realism and pragmatism.
Huh? I think maybe he proved his point.
What a day he's having, huh?
You know, exactly.
It's interesting. It is a second order. Like, it's a great way of thinking about it. I never did, but like if you had a friend who was optimistic they could jump off of a tall building and survive, you would not want to encourage that optimism, would you? You might want to have a conversation about, why do you think that? And, what are the possible ramifications? So it's a very interesting way of thinking about it, Tom.
And you can go wrong in various ways, right? You could be a naive optimist, or you could be a delusional. Spectrum of ways it can go wrong. And I think that you're going to make us, Augie, think about, when does it go right? Because obviously there are circumstances in which an optimist draws on his or her resources, where a pessimist doesn't, thinking, what's the point, right? So at least an optimist done right maximizes the use of their own
I don't know. I might argue that there's founded pessimism, right?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Right? So I'm not sure I'd say all pessimists are. I think optimists and pessimists can be equally unfounded.
Oh, I'm both. I'm a long-term optimist and a short-term pessimist. I'm both. I love that combination. Long-term, everything's going to work out, but short-term, it's going to be a shit show, and prepare for it.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I just got done watching the show Years and Years on HBO, if any of you have seen it. and highly recommended. It's only 6 or 7 episodes long. It's a British show, and it challenges the concept of long-term optimism. It without giving too much of the show away, it sort of raises the question: have we lived in a golden age, and is the golden age over? I'm not saying it's that pessimistic a show. It actually has its moments of optimism as well, but I am having my own long-term optimism challenged, I have to tell you, and I hope it returns.
And I just want to add one thought, which is, and I've mentioned this in a previous show, which could have been yesterday and it could have been 4 months ago, because that's what's happened to the time. But of course, you've all heard the saying, which is an optimist sees the glass as half full, a pessimist sees the glass as half empty. I once heard this advice, which is a real optimist is that when the glass is completely empty and even shattered or cracked, believes that it one day will be fixed and be full and overflowing again. And the reality of that saying, the saying is a flawed saying. It's just like the one that says the darkest hour is just before dawn, which it isn't actually, because the sun is starting to peak. It isn't. That is just about perspective. When you look at a glass that is half full or half empty, that's just a perspective, right? But that shouldn't really be the defining or the delineating, kind of mark between saying you are an optimist, you are a pessimist because of how you saw the same thing.
Yeah, I think actual half empty or half full are both completely accurate statements, right? Does it really convey optimism or pessimism? Probably not. You're right.
My son surprised me with the half glass thing. You guys made me thirsty right away. My son, when he was 12 years old, came into a room and said, I figured out the glass thing. And there had been no context. So I said, what glass thing? Half empty or half full? And I said, well, what's your answer? I figured he was going to do optimism, pessimism, He said, it depends on what was just happening prior. I said, what do you mean? He said, were you filling it up or were you emptying it out? Some things are what they are in the context of what they were becoming. And we need to pay attention to what comes before and what comes after to judge something accurately.
That is good.
12 years old.
You know what? You know what he is? He is an SOP, a son of a philosopher.
Yeah, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
And I love it when it comes from kids.
Me too. So maybe I should just sign off at this point.
Yeah, the interesting thing.
Do a George Costanza. All right, everybody, I'm out. That's me for today.
The interesting thing about optimism and pessimism I have found is also the way the world can perceive it based on their context. And what I mean by that is I made my first tweet as somebody who really tracked the data in January saying that this COVID thing was going to be a big deal, this epidemic. And people thought I was alarmist and stupid and silly and pessimistic. And in late February, I made a comment that I think we're looking forward to a summer with no festivals, no opening day. I think, I said, will we have conventions and how is this going to affect the campaign? And people thought, Augie, you're being alarmist and pessimistic and silly. And so it's easy for us to perceive others through our own context. I would argue I've been pragmatic through the whole thing, not pessimistic, not optimistic. But I do think that there's something about how we perceive others from our own perspective. And it tells us more about us maybe than what we think we're talking about the other person.
Could I argue, this is what happens when I spend too much time with someone like Tom. He's turning me into a wannabe philosopher. But it's interesting how you were called a pessimist because the news that you brought or shared or your perspective was perceived to be negative. Could we argue that you in fact are an optimist or that was an optimistic point of view, meaning, of course, that by recognizing what was happening and taking action and precautions, we were in fact ensuring a better outcome. The only problem, well, not the only problem, the only aspect of that outcome is that it wasn't the immediate gratification, right, which is unfounded optimism, but in fact deferred.
Yeah, I think that's similar to the half empty, half full. There's no difference between saying that this glass is optimistic or pessimistic. So calling someone optimistic or pessimistic is totally in judgment of the context. Now, I remember reading a Fast Company article in which either a SEAL team leader or some military leader was asked to compare dropping into a bad environment, two different kinds of people. One, a trained SEAL, and excuse me, both would be naked. I mean, no clothing, no tools. One would be dropped in such a manner and into this violent environment, this hostile environment. That person would be a SEAL team leader, totally trained, and pessimistic or negative. Let's put it that way. The other would be someone like any one of us, untrained, but having a positive attitude. And this leader, without being, flip, and just for the sake of the article, broke down why the untrained SEAL, but the untrained civilian, but of a positive nature would survive, and the trained SEAL would not.
Some of that has to do with whether you're going to access your own resources or not, or whether you think it's pointless. And my first thought, Jan, when you talk about special forces people, when they're dropped into a challenging situation, the main issue is rarely one of optimism or pessimism. It's one of focus. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with realism, right? I want the guy who's the most focused on everything situationally relevant.
Right, but his point, I think, and it's in an article that breaks it down, as I say, is that if you have a negative attitude, for whatever reason, maybe going into that there was death in his life, or some kind of injury to his psyche, that he would not survive. Right. He would not be able to focus.
Negativity is distracting.
I don't know.
The wrong kind of positivity can also be distracting, right?
Yeah.
So it's a context relative thing.
I'm not sure far be it for me to argue with the SEAL team leader. If I'm on a SEAL team's team and dropped in with somebody, I want it to be experienced and I want it to be cautious with my life, right? I don't want someone who's going to be optimistic and say, we're going to take that hill, no problem. That's the way in battle people die. I'd hate to have all of you think I'm negative or pessimistic, but I've been through marketing, as many of you have, for decades, and I've seen so many bandwagons, so much optimism, right? AI is going to be the next great thing. Virtual reality, we need to race into that. Everyone needs a social media account. We should do social sweepstakes because the more fans, the better. I've been through all of this marketing optimism, and you know what? I think it's time for some pessimism. Will that work? Maybe not. Let's prove it. Let's not race in. Let's ask ourselves whether we have founded or unfounded pessimism or optimism, right? I think it's a time for caution, for making smart decisions. That I don't mean for being conservative, right? Or for being a downer, for being negative. I just think it's a time to not bet everything on your sense of optimism, but to be really cautious about the challenges we faced in the next 12 months and 24 months. And this is going to be a hard recession. It's going to last for some time. So yeah, I don't mean to be the naysayer. I don't want to bring people down or have you think I'm negative. I just think that there is something really healthy about leadership that is hopeful but cautious.
A good combination.
I'm a little with you. I've long said that both optimism and pessimism are equally arrogant. And I think there is an aspect of, I think I'd rather be the person who jumps into a situation that is so volatile and uncertain, going in not knowing what's going to happen and trying to work it out in real time, rather than either thinking you know what's going to happen on either side.
Yeah, and we have cultural forces that, the lady who wrote the book Nickeled and Dimed, Barbara Ehrenreich, she wrote a real scathing critique a few years ago of positivity culture in America, the power of positive thinking stuff, the whole self-help, personal growth literature that has ended up being hyperbolic. I mean, people dancing in the fields of hyperbole when the truth is exciting enough, and sort of cultivating and encouraging this, what Augie was calling unfounded optimism, or ungrounded or unrealistic or naive, or and sometimes we just need to lay aside those labels of optimism and pessimism and attend to more important, like competency and mastery and prudence, some of the virtues that have been recognized for forever, like the ability to take in truth, acknowledge it and deal with it. Aristotle's courage, things like that are much more important ingredients in our moving forward productively in however challenging an environment than just a simple label, optimist, pessimist.
Yeah, I agree. That's why the parsing of those labels or not using the labels is so important. It's not important that I'm optimistic or pessimistic when I'm looking at a half full or half empty glass of water. It's my attitude toward the use of that content. You know, I can see how that water will establish some, will give me the means to do something positive, or I can look at it as there's not enough here for me to work with. So it's futile.
I also think it's really unique to look at things from a different perspective. As someone who's been very focused on himself most of his life, now I have 2 little dudes. I'm a soccer coach. I have 10 little kids that I'm responsible for. We had a call 3 weeks ago about practice, having social distancing, masks on their little faces, no scrimmage, which I got a bunch of crap from my fellow coaches on because I'm not, my kids can't scrimmage. That doesn't work. The science is not there. And that's the unfounded piece that I really enjoyed about this, Augie. Thank you for your time today. It was really cool and illuminating. That's where I'm a little bit like germophobic to begin with. Everything has to be clean and perfect. So my issues alone, like my own skepticism around putting my kids back out on the field, was I had to separate myself there and look exactly what you're talking about. What are the numbers? And I said to my crew on the Zoom call, I said, guys, there's anywhere between 20 and 50% chance that these kids, who some of them are in daycare, some of them are doing other things that we can't protect. There's going to be one of those kids that may have COVID. We have to treat practice like one of them has COVID, and that everyone has to have their masks on. Everyone has to be safe. And us parents and coaches, we have to be 6 feet apart. And I got so much grief from some of my buddies, even on the team, even fellow coaches. So I was like, it wasn't trying to be pessimistic. It was just trying to be like, hey, it isn't even me that I'm worried about. It's my little dudes and your little dudes, right? These are 8-year-old kids. They're looking to us for advice and safety and to be protected. And that kind of pulled me out of my own issue about looking at data and looking at the science and looking at what is safe. It wasn't even about whether I'm pessimistic or optimistic. It was realism.
Right.
So I wanted to ask a question of the group, which kind of draws on what William was talking about, that being optimistic or pessimistic is in fact an arrogance, which is when we think about brands, because many of us are marketers or come from that world, and all of these communications, we're in this together, and the latest round of brand, shockers is all the "we're open again" and the like, "come on in and come on back," and and what should a brand do in general if not taking this arrogant position, which is either optimistic or pessimistic, right? We've always used. I wonder how that overlay of emotion plays into it as well. So we just think about that world of using emotion to sell, to persuade, to inform, to remind, and then this filter or this lens of optimism and pessimism, recognizing that they are maybe kind of watchouts as opposed to guardrails. Anyone want to bite on that? I don't even know if that's making sense. In my mind, it was.
I'll bite. It reminds me of when we talked at one point about the terrible situation of especially restaurants going out of business. And I think we spoke about the difference between shutting down a business and shutting off your mind. And I have seen restaurants in my local area who shut down. And of course, I don't know all the details, but I would say that there's a percentage of them that shut down their minds, shut down the possibilities. And maybe that comes to a positive nature or negative nature in what they could do and make it work, make something work before they close down, before they are defeated.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it. I've written about actually a tiny little restaurant here in Milwaukee, not part of a chain or anything, but it's close to my house. And one of the things they started doing was they had a pandemic picnic basket every day of the week that was designed for multiple people. They also had some items you could order separately. And so they thought through a little bit of a social aspect as well as individual. The other thing that I thought they did really smart, like one of the mistakes I think, you know, restaurants that close down, did they make a mistake or not? I mean, they've got to make their own decision. But one of the mistakes I found restaurants making is thinking that they could just shift from using their existing menu to delivery. And, you know, we've all gotten soggy, lousy food, right? You know, it was made a half hour ago, it's terrible, and it's not salvageable through microwave. This restaurant experimented and found ways of basically giving you stuff with instructions that says put this in at 400 for 10 minutes, finish it up, and you get something that tastes like it just came out of the kitchen. And I thought that was really advisable. Here was a restaurant taking this terrible situation, finding a way to keep the wheels on, but also to not just do kind of the lazy thing, which is, I guess we'll keep doing what we've been doing, but to really rethink their situation and customer situations. And unfortunately, interestingly enough, as Milwaukee, where I live, has started to open up, they've moved away from their pandemic picnic basket and pickup menu. My wife haven't been able to use them as often. I think they're going to be back to it in the next month or so here in Milwaukee, but you know, we'll see.
And that goes back to realism too. I live in Russian Hill in San Francisco, and there's a great place called Za. It's been one of the best pizza places ever for the last 30 years. And the guy owns 2 of them, and he's flourishing right now. So a lot of the neighbors, you know, keep buying pizzas. My kids love him. You know, they know him. He's got another place down the street. He's done very well. And then there's 2 super high-end restaurants that are right here that had a whole, you know, Michelin kind of experience, and they can't replicate, right? They can't do it. So it's like, it's what's realistic is one thing. If you're a pizza place, or if you're a burger place, or if you're a sandwich place, or, you know, you can do, I think that was a great idea that you can say, hey, heat this up at 400 degrees. Otherwise it tastes like mush. Those are things, I think that's been a bigger issue, even on the criticisms of people on the right sometimes say, hey, well, go out and rethink and do something and get a job and go reinvent yourself. It's like, yeah, some people can reinvent themselves, but some restaurants just can't, right? I mean, it's like, that's where the big dilemma is with the 50 million people that are out of work. Some of them can reinvent themselves and have the wherewithal or the mental capacity or, you know, cognition to do it.
Yeah,
I think that's the
COVID
hard
has
part.
only put what has been a common thread for the last decade, I think, on steroids. And like, if I had to read one more article about how out of work truckers should become coders, you know, it's like,
Yeah,
The
exactly.
path may not be there. We might have to think of different paths here.
You know, Joey, you brought up sports, and I'm happy to share with you offline some tips. Just finishing up a AAA lacrosse season with my 2 kids in Milwaukee, actually, 3 weekends in a row. But
You're in Milwaukee too?
I was the last 3 weekends for because all the other lacrosse tournaments closed down and everybody moved to Milwaukee. So yeah, I'm in Minneapolis. But anyway, I learned something from my 10-year-old's coach, which was, he said, hey, Liam, before you go out on the field, I'm going to have somebody run into you and hit you hard because you're too smart to play the game, because you're seeing the game happening and you've already figured out that ball's gone, so you don't go after it. And so you're giving up before it's over. And what I need to do is get you out of your head and get you into your body. So I'm going to have somebody hit you regularly. And every time your teammate runs by you on the field, I'm going to have them hit you. So that you get out of your head and you get into the adrenaline of the game. And
I think I saw this in the Mighty Ducks.
Probably. But I realized as we were talking, I don't see any difference in optimism and resilience. To me, they're synonymous. And your story about the restaurant opening during COVID, there's a restaurant up in northern Minnesota that had just opened, bought all this product, and they're like, you know, we can't open our restaurant, we may as well just shut down, right? Food's going to go to waste, maybe we give some to the staff, whatever. They're like, no, you know what, tomorrow's Friday, it's Fish Friday, we're going to fry up all the fish, we're going to donate it to the church, we're going to drive around and give it to every member of the church as something to do, and we'll take donations for the church. They started doing Fish Friday every Friday, and they had the best Fridays they've had ever. And so now their restaurant is that, I don't know, I think they borrowed somebody's truck or something, they're driving around. They also figured out that there was a real market for industrial toilet paper. So they took the big, huge box because they were getting it from a different supplier. They weren't getting it from the grocery store or Target. They were getting it from food supply.
Commercial
So
supply chain.
yeah. So, I mean, that is that optimism? Is that resilience? Is that grit? Is it friggin' stubbornness? Is it luck? Maybe it's all of those things.
Combination, yeah, exactly.
Well, and the other thing though that I think we sometimes miss in all this is that I have this thing about case studies. It's easy to find a case study of any terrible thing you want to do, right? There's always been a case study of, like, you know, I sort of joked earlier, I came out of social media, I researched it, I ran it, and one of the things I hated more than anything was social sweepstakes. Because you're getting fans and you're getting engagement. Well, nobody cares. You're not driving a positive experience. You're not, you know, collecting advocates, but you can find case studies that say, look, here's a really good example of how you can use a social. And so the thing about case studies that I think is important to realize is that a case study shows what one organization did. And I think that's a great story. But if every company tried to do that, every single company, the restaurants would fail, right? I mean, it worked for one. This comes back to differentiation, but and I think it makes Joey's point. I think there are places that can do it and places that just for their category, their location, whatever, can't, you know, and they should all try. I'm not saying giving up, but
whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're correct. Isn't that Ford who said that?
Yeah, except some people who think they can't.
That's true. That's true.
And can. Yeah.
Context. Yeah.
Exactly.
If it can.
I have to run. It has been lovely, Joe, to be on the show, and this has been fabulous. You have great friends. I really appreciate it. So I hope you all enjoyed, and I appreciate you giving an opportunity for me to share and to engage. And if you want to continue, you know where to find me on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Thanks, Augie.
Thanks, Augie.
Hey,
And Amy, when you're in Milwaukee again, you let me know.
Augie, I will be in touch with you. And remember, you know, if you want to pop by next week, you're welcome. You know what I mean?
Thanks. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Bye, Augie. All right, and for the rest of you lot, whoever is still here, I'm just going to stop the recording.